Okay, welcome everybody. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Stan Graham and I'm one of the field consultants for the Juris Professional Services team. And if any of you have been to the PMAC conference the last couple of years, you probably would have seen me there. And so today I'm going to be talking about conflict inquiry and two major aspects of it. Part of it managing your conflict data, and then conflict search tips, because the two things are really integrated, and the success of your conflict search is going to depend on how you organize your data and how you manage your data. We're going to just a little brief overview of what we're going to cover today. The first part, we're going to talk about determining what your conflict search criteria is going to be. Then we're going to talk about how to organize the information in Juris. Then we'll talk about how to conduct different conflict searches, and also the differences between Juris and Juris Suite. I know not everyone has Juris Suite. Juris Suite has a conflict search product in it also. We'll cover both of them in this. And then we'll finish up with the search tips and how to use wildcards and effective search logic. So we'll start out talking about determining your conflict search data. Now, one of the things that's really important in determining your conflict search data is to be organized, and it starts with your client matter intake. The first thing you're going to want to do is maintain written policies, procedures, and guidelines for doing conflict searches at your firm. That way, if you have a change in back office personnel of any type at any level, whether it's the person who does the searches or who manages them, that person has something to fall back on when they're taking over for somebody else. A lot of times this just gets shortchanged because I know we're all busy, but wherever you can do this, it's very helpful. You can consult your state bar associations or the ABA for guidelines. And then you might need to organize your procedures by practice class. If you have multiple practice classes within your organization, the type of conflict search that you do could be different. So the first thing you're going to want to do is collect and organize the information from new clients so that future conflict searches will be effective. Now, when you're interviewing potential clients, and usually it's the attorney that's doing this, and he's usually filling out a client intake form. If you don't have a client intake form that's filled out or some sort of email format that you use, you should develop one. A lot of firms, unfortunately, their conflict inquiry consists of them sending an email to all the other attorneys in the office, and they see the email saying, hey, do you want to have a conflict with this? The attorneys are all busy. They glance at it. They don't put a lot of thought into it. They'll respond yes, and then work will end up getting started. Hopefully, if you're sitting on this session, you've moved past that level into doing your conflict searches in Juris and Juris Suite. But if you don't have a client intake form and you would like to see some samples, let Liz know at the end, and she'll get your email address, and I can send you some sample forms to use. So anyway, when the attorney is interviewing potential clients, we need to get information about any related or associated entities. This could include subsidiaries or board members and officers, any co-defendants on previous litigation. Of course, if you don't do litigation work, these next two aren't going to be as critical. Any opposing parties on previous litigation, and also who key competitors could be to your firm. Your clients should know who they consider their key competitors are. You can supplement the client interview information also with some independent research if you needed to. For those of you that have access to corporate affiliations on LexisNexis, that's something that you can use to find board memberships, corporate officers, a corporate hierarchy, which would be a list of subsidiaries and things like that, and any competitors. In fact, here's an example of a corporate hierarchy from corporate affiliations. In this case, I chose Microsoft just because they had a nice little drill down table. But the example I'd like to point out on this is that, you know, if you did a search just on Microsoft, you may not discover a conflict. And if you look, for example, under their business division, they have a subsidiary called FAST and one called FAST USA. So if you were thinking of taking on a new client and you didn't have information on FAST in your database to know they're related to Microsoft, to know that you probably need to do a search on that as well as Microsoft, you could develop a conflict and not be aware of it. So if they don't know or have this sort of information, and in this case it's going to be mostly a public company, a lot of you may not do a lot of business with public companies, and a lot of you might. But it's one place where you can get information that even the client may not have or provide. Not all of them are going to be as huge as Microsoft as far as all the subsidiaries. You can also get information from some of the public record searching and Secretary of State materials and things like that. Here's an example of a list of competitors that comes from Hoover's company records, which is also something on LexisNexis. In this case, again, I did Microsoft, and you can see there's a list of, looks like about 20 different competitors in there. This could have changed since I did the slide, but it's something else, that another way where you can supplement to make more effective conflict searching. So once you've done this and you've gathered the information, then the question is, how do I organize it in Juris? Now, I know a lot of you also might be thinking, well, I've already got, 5,000 clients in Juris, and we don't have that information on them. And I understand that. The need to go back and backfill that information would be your call. Most people aren't, but that doesn't mean you can't start doing a best practice going forward so that your future conflict searches are more effective than the ones that they have been in the past. So don't get all flustered and upset if you haven't been doing it this way in the past, and you may decide you don't want to get more information, or you don't need to. Again, that depends on the type of law that your firm is practicing. But I'm going to give you some best tips here on how to organize the information in Juris. Again, just to repeat what I said earlier, we want to include potential conflict information on your client intake form. And then we want to create organized client note cards in Juris for various categories. Now, I categorized the examples that I gave earlier for you here, but you can categorize them however you like. One would be related parties. You could have a card just called related parties, or if you want, you could create a note card called subsidiaries, board memberships, officers. You could have one called co-defendants, opposing parties, competitors. The nice thing about doing that is when you run the search, it'll tell you, particularly in Juris Suite, it tells you which note card it came from. I think Juris does too, but it speeds up your process. If you look at a hit and you see it's in a category that is not posing a conflict, then you're speeding up the decision process for the attorney that's going to get this information to decide whether or not there's a conflict or not. And here's an example if you create the note cards in Juris. I created this one at the client level. You can create them at the matter level if you want to or need to, but I gave it as an example here. I have one called opposition. I have one called competitors, one called co-defendants, one called related parties, and then I listed the different ones in there. You'll see in the examples I gave, I've got a couple with the same last name of Carpenter, and I've got a couple with company names named Uriel. I could just as easily have not put the Inc. or the LLC onto those, but as you'll see when we get to the searching tips, you may or may not include Inc. or LLC in your conflict search, depending on the logic that you're using for your search. Now, conducting conflict searches and the differences between Juris and Juris Suite, let me go through that with you. Now, when you're doing setting your fields to be searched for your conflict. In core Juris, that's set up under your firm options. So under firm options, there's a conflict tab, and you can decide which fields you want to search. Most of the time, most people, it's very easy to set them to all fields. One of the things you'll have to be aware of is if your searches are bringing a large number of mishits in a field that would be unlikely to give you a genuine conflict, you can pull those out of there. For Juris Suite, the fields are set under the firm settings, which is under admin, under the silver Juris ball in the corner. Generally, you will want to search all available fields. Probably not so much in Juris Suite because there's some additional fields in there that may not bring a benefit. Search, again, not just on the potential client, but also search on the competitors, co-defendants, related entities, and opposing parties. I've worked with a lot of firms where they'll go in and they take on a new client, and the only thing that they search on is the new client's name. That's it. They don't get any hits, and they go off and say, no, we didn't get any hits in our conflict inquiry, and so we're not concerned about it. When in reality, if you search also on their competitors and you find out that one of your other attorneys is doing work, you already have a matter set up for a competitor and you didn't know it, then there could be a conflict of interest there that needs to be determined by the attorney that's taking on the business. So just searching on the company name that you're taking on as a client is not the best thing to do. It's really these other items that are more important. But again, if you haven't been collecting this information in the past, you're not going to have a rich history of that right now. But if you start doing that going forward, you're going to start building a nice, rich history and database of information that's going to make your conflict searches more effective going forward. Here's a screenshot of the firm options in core Juris. Remember, you have to be in maintenance mode in order to get to the firm options. This is the sort of thing that you wouldn't necessarily have to kick everybody out of Juris to go in and do, because you're not really impacting any transactions. In this case, I just kicked everything over to the right. When you first install Juris, these are all over here on the left saying they're available to search. And then over on the right, you just kick them to the right with this button here. Sometimes there could be a field that you don't want to be over there or don't need to be over there. Some of you may not use the source of business field, but if you decide you don't want to use one of the fields, and most of these are, I can't see a real reason why you wouldn't want any of these, but stuff comes up and you just highlight it and kick it back over to the left and hit save. When you go into, if you have Juris Suite, and you click on the silver Juris button and you go to admin and go to firm settings, and you come down here to conflict inquiry, this is what you're going to see initially. And now there are a lot of fields that are available for searching here that are not available for searching in the core Juris. Some of the big ones that I think you really need to be aware of, particularly if you have Juris Suite but you haven't been using your conflicts here, you've been doing it in the other one. The time narratives can be searched if you want. It can search build time. It can search unbilled time. It can even search unposted entries in Juris Suite, which is not something that can be done in the core Juris product. It can also, you've got vendor information that can be searched. I don't have it expanded. These little gray triangles here mean that you can expand things under there. If you've created some user-defined fields that you're collecting information in for some reason and you want to search against that, you can do it here as well. False means it's not going to be searched. True means it is going to be searched. In this case, there's a bunch of client billing fields and matter billing fields that frequently gets used similar to a UDF, but they already exist in Juris. They're already created there. You can pull them into bill designs. A lot of times, particularly if you're a fairly new Juris user in the last couple of years, if you had some sort of data field in your old software that we converted over, it's not uncommon for us to create and put certain data in one of these billing fields. And those billing fields will have a name. You'll give them a name. They won't just say matter billing field 1. If it's like if you do a lot of insurance work, you might create a billing field for the insurance adjuster to put their name in there, and that field will be called adjuster. You can search it or not search it. True will search it, false won't. But that's something that's not available in the core Juris product. The same thing, again, with the expense entries. You can search the narratives there. The only thing I could think of where you might possibly want to search those sort of things would be if there was something in the narrative that would have, if you have it automatically populating in your expense narratives with vendors, and you wanted to make sure there wasn't a conflict with perhaps a professional witness or expert witness that your firm has hired in the past. You could search that. That person probably is also set up as a vendor, so you could have it search the vendors too. And there's a number of fields under there that you could search as well. But that's the big key difference between the core Juris and the Juris Suite is your ability to have a lot more different fields to search to fit how your database has been set up or possibly converted, and or how you're inputting or collecting information. A lot of people don't necessarily do the expense narratives and the time entry narratives just because it'll bring back a lot of mishits sometimes. It depends on the sort of information that you normally put in those narratives, and also on your search terms, and we'll see that here shortly. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of the conflict search tips and how to use wildcards and things like that in the conflict inquiry. The most important thing that you can use when you're getting ready to do your conflict search is what I call using brain logic in your search logic. A lot of people will get just either a list of names or a company name or a partial name, and they'll just plug it in, search on it, and kind of go from there. And they'll type in exactly what was given to them. And if you recall back when I was showing you the note cards where one thing had Inc. and one had LLC, if the person doing the interview doesn't either makes an assumption that it's Inc. or doesn't put it on there, or does put it on there, or puts it on there wrong, or things like that, you're not necessarily going to know or catch that. So a lot of times I'll look and say, well, is the search term, is it very common or is it unique? For example, back on my note card, I had a couple people there whose name was Carpenter. Carpenter may be a fairly common name. The companies that were associated with them were called Uriel, which is probably not a very common name. And so I wouldn't necessarily want to add the LLC or the Inc. because I want to just get all the hits on Uriel. But if I was searching on Carpenter, I might really need to make sure that it was Michael or Molly, like I had on the card, and in some sort of manner or fashion. So we need to think about those things. How am I going to search on this before I do it? Don't just be a automaton robot and say, well, that's what they gave me, and because the other thing is, depending on how new you are at your firm, you don't know how your predecessors have entered data into the note cards or where they put it. You don't know if they put Inc. or LLC. You don't know if they put commas in there or include the commas, or they used a period after Inc., or did they spell out incorporated. It's amazing how people have their own little idiosyncrasies about how they enter data, and they just assume that everyone else must do it the same way, and that's really not the case. you need to assume that whoever entered that data, a lot of times they don't necessarily know that that is an important factor in your search, and they're just putting it in there, and you might have inherited this database, and so you have to be aware of these possible pitfalls that you could fall into. Also, your originating attorney should evaluate the results. Again, coming back to the organization I talked about earlier, this makes their job a lot easier if you've got your note cards organized in a manner that they can very quickly ascertain whether the hit is a good hit or a valid hit. You also will want to anticipate spelling errors, and you're going to want to use wildcards to avoid spelling errors. I've given an example here. There's a company based in Cincinnati, Ohio called Procter & Gamble. I happen to live in Southwest Ohio, so I'm fairly familiar with that company. And it's actually spelled the way I have it there in the first case. And but it's so commonly misspelled the way I have it in the second example there, because a lot of people think of a proctor when they were in college, whatever, someone would proctor a test. It's spelled with an OR. So it's not uncommon for people to misspell that when they're putting it in the database. And even if you're meticulous about spelling, I've noticed a lot of times when I'm typing things, I'll go back and look at an email. Well, one of my pet peeves is like the word your. You got Y-O-U-R and you got Y-O-U''R-E. I hate it when those are misused, and I know the rule very well, and I'll go back and proofread things I've written and see that I've typed it the opposite of the rule, even though I know what that rule is. So, you know, even though we try to be meticulous in our work, we're all human, and we're all going to make mistakes. Now, so the use of a wildcard, and actually, I think we're probably going to have time for this. When I get through the PowerPoint, I'm going to pull up my database briefly here and just run a few conflict searches so I can show you some of the syntax and the ideas on how to do things. But I used an example here with Procter & Gamble. The question mark is a wildcard that will look for the one character to be inserted into that place no matter what it is. So in this case, I have Procter spelled with a question mark in that next to the last place, so the search won't care if that's an O or an E or any other sort of typo you might have put in there. It doesn't care. It's going to bring them back, and you'll see them. Now, you'll also notice that I put this one in quotation marks. Quotation marks cause an interesting change in how your data gets searched also. The ampersand is normally not a searchable character, and the conflict search engine thinks of that as an and so that both words have to be in the name. So like in the first example, if I had just typed in Procter & Gamble, the first three over there at the far left, it would have required both Procter and Gamble to be in there, but it would have brought back Gamble, Procter, which I don't know why it would be in there that way, but it would bring it back, or anywhere where Gamble is in the same field with Procter. When you put in the quotation marks, all of a sudden, everything within there it becomes a searchable item except for the wildcards, like the question mark. So now, all of a sudden, that ampersand needs to be in there. So because I put it in quotation marks, the ampersand became a searchable character. And that brings up an additional potential issue, is what if the person entering the data had typed out the word and instead of the ampersand? Well, in quotation marks, the word and is going to be searchable. Outside of quotational marks, it becomes a connector again, just requiring both words to be in the same data field. The other thing that you can use is what we call an OR connector to search for multiple things at the same time. If you have a large number of similarly named things, you can you can either search on, if the name is common and you have to use the quotation marks, you can do multiple searches and use the word or outside the quotation marks, and it'll basically do multiple searches all at the same time. If you go to juris.com/help, you can always double check. There's a lot of instructions there on how the syntax works, how the wildcards work, what the quotation marks do, and things along those lines. Also, and the last thing I have on there is I like to save the results electronically. So if you've generated some results with a hit, a lot of people will print those off and put them in a the file folder or Redwell or whatever it is your firm uses to keep your information. So I'm a big proponent of also saving things electronically as well. If you've worked with me on other engagements, you'll know a lot of times when we're running reports, I'll say, well, go ahead and print it off, but let's also save this PDF in some place where we can get back to it later. I'm a big fan of that on these sort of things also. This is what the conflict search looks like in Juris Suite, if you haven't seen it before. If you have Juris Suite and have not been using it to do your conflict inquiries, one of the nice things is it highlights your hits in yellow. In this case, I did a search, and it tells me what my search terms were. I searched on the word Marconi, and it also, I can see that a search that was done previously by me up here also that I could get back to if I wanted to. It was an archived search. But I searched on Marconi, and I got one hit, meaning one record. And in this case, it's telling me that it came out of the client notes, and it's got the note index, and it tells me that it came out of the opposition file. So for this company, this Marconi, and of course I have to know whether or not the Marconi I searched on is John or Marconi Enterprises, or if it's just unrelated. But if it's John Marconi, he's listed as an opposition in a prior case to this HDW company. And that's going to help me determine very quickly if I have a conflict or not. So when I do a search on John Marconi's come to me and asked to become a client, and I ran a search on Marconi. Notice I didn't do just John Marconi. At first I started with Marconi. If I got too many, then I might have done something like, John and Marconi, some along those or enterprises, and then I look at this and I say, oh, wait a minute, you know what? HDW Inc. is still an active client of ours, and we represented them in litigation against these three companies, which he must in some way be related to. And so very quickly we're able to identify potential conflict. By the way, the other, and I'm not sure if I have it in the slide presentation, the other wild card is the asterisk. And the asterisk you put at the end of a word, so it'll get anything that starts with it. If you're going to search on some sort of long word and that could have a typo later on, sometimes it's not necessarily bad to just type the first 5 or 6 letters and then put the asterisk on the end to bring it up. You might find spelling errors that way. I actually had this happen once where I think we were searching on the word construction, and we were in the client's database, and I gave an example. I did CONSTR asterisk. And in this case, I also didn't have to use quotes. So I had the company's first name. The second word was CONSTR, and then asterisk. So we get anything that starts with constru, and which is probably not a lot of words. And we actually got a result where someone had typed in the full word construction, but had misspelled it as construction, or got the R and the U or something after the wild card was backwards. They never would have found that conflict if they hadn't used the asterisk on the end of the word. So that comes back to the brain logic that I was talking about before, where, you know, we got to kind of think, how do humans work? How do we think? How do other people think? And being aware of common mistakes that people can make, or things that people don't know are important that could be important. And this is an example of that, a big long word like if someone had a company name with the word like entrepreneurial in it, I would definitely use a wild card after probably about 6 letters, just in case we had represented them. Someone would misspell that word a lot. So let me summarize what I've gone over here so far, and then I'm going to jump over and just do a couple example searches here. And also, this slide has my my contact information. If you want to contact me, if you don't want to ask Liz for a sample of a client intake form, if you don't have one, or just would like to see some other examples, you can email me directly there if you like. The phone number actually does not have a voicemail on it, so if you call and it rings, it means I'm not there. And if you call and get a busy signal, it means I'm on with another client. I'm in the process of trying to get that changed, but I've had some technical issues with it. So you're really better off emailing for that sort of information. But anyway, to summarize what we've been through, is we want to maintain clear guidelines. We want to collect detailed information from potential new clients, and again, that's got to be based on the practice class. Some things you just don't need that level of detail, depending on the type of law or the type of clients that you represent. You don't have to, but you can supplement client information with independent research if that's an available tool to you. Not everyone has that as an available tool, but if you do, it does provide some opportunities, particularly if you do represent publicly traded companies. I would say that carries more importance. And one of the supplemental type researches you can do that I didn't show an example of, but I mentioned is, if you use LexisNexis for research, you can also search like Secretary of State materials to see if there's other companies associated with an individual or subsidiaries. Then you would organize, collect the data logically in Juris. Like I said, I'm a big fan of using the note cards and not just lumping them all into one, but breaking them out into the subcategories, because anything that will speed up the process on the end of evaluation. Use logic in crafting your search and supplement with wildcards as appropriate. And then use the same logic in evaluating your results, and contact the appropriate billing timekeeper of the conflict or the originating timekeeper to determine if there is truly a conflict. And that comes back to like the very first thing that I mentioned about your local bar association and state association guidelines. I know in some states, if there's a conflict, but you haven't done any work for the client after so many years, then it's not a conflict. That's up to you or your firm or whoever's making that decision to know what those are. And so you may want to ask the managing committee, is it my responsibility to know that, or is it the originating timekeeper's responsibility to know that, or both, or how they want that sort of thing in there. So that's going to be your call. Let me drop out of here just for a moment and go into Juris and just show you a couple examples of running a search. And let me sign into, I'm going to do this in Juris Suite actually. So just let me get signed in here, and I'll just show you a couple syntax examples. Those of you that don't have Juris Suite, you're going to get a brief little preview of kind of what it looks like. There's a lot of different modules or snap-ins for Juris Suite. There's a reporting module. There's a budgeting module. There's the time and expense entry module, which comes into my transactions here. There's some nice little summary type things. But what I'm going to show you here, there's one called inquiry. Now, there's a client matter inquiry function also under the inquiry. And there's also a collections module and the business intelligence module. But when I go to the inquiry module, there's a client matter inquiry. Works just like the one in the core Juris product, but it's kind of nice because you can actually put totals in for the different rows and stuff when you look at them, and you can filter. That's not what this class is about, though, so I'm going to jump on to the conflict inquiry here. So here's my conflict inquiry. I'm going to run a search. Let me run a search on white court here to start with. We'll see how many, if I get any results on it. Okay, I got a couple of results with this. And you'll notice the first one here is white court enterprises. So I have to be aware, okay, what did my search do? Well, what this did, because I did not use quotation marks or any connectors, when you just put two words in there, it thinks of those as if you had put an or between them. It's looking for anything with white or anything with court. It doesn't care which. So it did bring back white court enterprises, but it also brought back a couple mishits. I've got a Carl White here, which came back in the, what field did that come back from? It came back from a conflict note for this particular matter. I don't normally name mine conflict, but this is an old record from the database that I inherited. And then there's a billing address contact that came back with just all it says is Ms. White. So these aren't helpful to me. So if I wanted to really truly search just white court, I've got a couple options. I could put that in quotation marks. So now the white court has to appear just like that, and now I've got my only result. If I wanted to if I needed to say enterprises, if that was critical to my results, I could type in enterprises and search that. I could also use the wildcard for a long word. And get the same sort of result. But I like the fact that it highlights this in yellow. That's kind of nice. Now, if I'd gone all the way with the LLC or whatever, in this particular instance, adding LLC to the search doesn't really add anything. If I put it in quotation marks because of the way I'm doing it, the comma, you can see over here on this record, there's a comma in there. That comma normally is not a searchable character, but it does become searchable if it's inside the quotation marks. And here's an example of where if I did white court, comma, LLC, and I did a search on it, I don't get any results because I don't have the enterprises. In this case, if I put the enterprises in, it finds it because I typed it exactly right. If I take out the comma, I get no results. So you can see when you use the quotation marks, punctuation becomes searchable. Otherwise, it's not searchable. The LLC doesn't necessarily add anything to the search either. Another piece of logic you need to think about is some people, and you can think about this with your own company name, some people will put LLC, some people will put L period C period, some will spell out limited liability company. So if you get a search like that from one of your attorneys, you need to apply this logic to it that, do I really need to add LLC to the search? Now, if the name is really common, well, then probably yes. You can also do something along the lines of, if I do White Court in quotes, and I do and LLC or L period C period, or L space C space, or limited, because I want to get limited liability company, and then run this search, it's not bringing me back a result because something doesn't appear the same. I have to see what it is now. I actually expected to get something with that. Hang on a second. Okay, it doesn't like the connector, probably. Hang on. Well, I apologize for this. It must be looking at and as a word instead of connector. That's exactly what it was doing. In this case, it actually searched both. In this case, the ampersand is part of this word for some reason. So the ampersand becomes the connector and not the word and. Sorry about that. If you're not sure about how that works, again, go to juris.com/help, and it's got all the syntax there. Familiarize yourself with that. Print it out if you need to. Give it to the person who's doing the conflict searching if it's not you, and if you can't remember, and just keep it handy to look for those sort of things. So that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to cover. Liz, I don't know if you've collected any questions that anybody have.
Of course I have.
Given you over the course of the...
But of course, yes. So the first question is there a standard in place for LLC or L.L.C. Or Inc. or Incorporated? Is there any sort of standard for that, or is it just whatever works?
It depends. I'm wondering. There's not a standard in Juris. I'm wondering if your question stems around, is there a standard for the way companies should present it? My experience is that it's all over the place. I spent a number of years in customer support in Dayton, Ohio, assisting with public record searches, and I can tell you that even in state databases, they're entered in multiple different ways, because you've got different people entering them. That some people are literal, some of them don't know that it matters, and it probably doesn't matter. As long as they understand who it is, and the courts will recognize it either way. They're not going to throw it out because you put periods between there and instead of spaces, or vice versa. But is there a standard? No, not. Juris doesn't have one, and remember, you have to think about how other people might have entered the data. If there was a standard, that doesn't mean they followed it, and we still need to be aware of that in building our search.
Okay, so the next question is actually in regard to that. Do you think that you should, when you do a search, type it in or copy it, if possible, from a client listing or an email conflict or pleadings?
Well, again, if we're talking about the LLC portion of it, unless the name is common, I will usually leave that off. If you are copying and pasting from some sort of a court document, a pleading, something you got off a PACER, things along those lines, depending on the court, a lot of those have character limits, and they're chopped off and truncated, and don't have everything in there. So copying and pasting from there, again, when you're running a conflict search in Juris, if you were setting up your record and copying and pasting from a record like that, that doesn't mean that later, down the road, someone else is doing conflicts 5 years later. They don't know how that was copied in there or entered in there. The attorney doesn't necessarily know when they do the intake interview, when they fill it out and they give it to you. So again, unless it's a real common name, I search on all variations of it just to make sure I cover all my bases on it. Don't just take what they give you. You could actually be a hero at your firm if you discover a conflict because you found out that the other firm was Inc. instead of LLC, but it turned out it was the same owner or something. When the information you gave you only said LLC. Cover them both ways. Now, if you get way too many mishits, then you're going to need to perhaps ask the originating attorney, you know what, I also ran this with Inc. and I got a lot. Does that matter, or can I let that go? And then they might say, well, can you show me a few examples? And they might want to look at it. And of course, if they're a timekeeper using Juris Suite, they may have access to the conflict inquiry, and you can give that to them as well, and they can try some of this stuff, or you can tell them what to type in there if they want. I would just be on your guard if you're letting the attorneys use your conflict inquiry. They're not going to think about all these things that I've just talked about as far as the different ways it could appear or who entered it in the database. I've just seen that happen too many times. I don't know if that answered the question or helped at all, but I would probably, if I'm entering the data, would try to put it in there in the most logical or what's consistent with either the firm's, if it's a firm, whatever their logo says or their official name is. But when you're doing, if I'm creating the data, you could also put the multiple different things in the note card. You could put LLC with periods, without periods, with spaces. You could type out limited liability corporation or limited liability corp, all those sort of things if you want to. But in the note card, I find that's probably a little bit of overkill, unless, again, it's a common name. If it's Smith Brothers something or other, you're going to get a lot of mishits no matter what. There's no avoiding that. It's going to happen, and that's when you maybe need to search on the address. And maybe you need to know what the past addresses are at the company to know whether or not it's a valid hit or not.
Okay. And actually, Stan, could you put up your contact information one more time? Because we have several questions still, and I don't think we'll make it to all of them.
Sure.
All right. So once again, if we don't get to your question, please feel free to contact Stan about it. And actually, Stan, I hate to do this, but we're going to have to end there.
Okay.
And actually, so email Stan or myself if you still have questions to be answered. And judging by my list, there are still several of you. I apologize for that. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you, Stan, and you will receive. Sorry?
I should make you aware. I'm on vacation next week. So
there might be a little bit of a delay, yeah.
Yeah, there could be a delay if you have a question. I will be checking my email periodically, but mostly for more critical stuff. But yeah, just be aware that I'm going to be out of pocket for most of next week.
Good to know. And if it is urgent, feel free to send it to me and let me know it's urgent, and I will find someone to answer your question. So all attendees will receive an email next week with a recording of the webinar as well as the slides from Stan's presentation. And there is a brief survey at the end of the webinar we ask that you take a moment to complete. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.